Okay, we're live. My friend and guest today is Caryn Kopp. She is the chief door opener at Kopp Consulting. We've had a lot of firsts on the show. You are officially our first chief door opener. So
I should be the only chief door opener.
That is a trick question. I know that you have a trademark on that naming convention. So
Yes.
maybe give a sense for everyone listening to this. The world that you come from and that kind of what Kopp Consulting does in the marketplace.
Yeah, so I'll start with the last one first and I'll back into where I come from. So Kopp Consulting has been around for 23 years. We just started our 24th year in business. I can't believe it's been that long. I was our first door opener, which means I get our clients in the door with their prospects for the first meeting. We hire only senior level business developers to do this work. And they represent our clients as if they were a member of the client's team with a strategically selected group of prospects and carefully crafted sales language, sales messaging, and then do the outreach, but it's relationship one-to-one outreach, phone, email, well done LinkedIn, which opens the relationship for our client to go in and close a sale. We do a warm handoff transfer, which means our door opener is on the meeting with our client to make sure that a second meeting results from the first meeting. So where did I come from? My background is consumer packaged goods, brand management, and business development. And getting in the door and learning about people is by far my favorite thing to do. I don't get to do it so much anymore because I run the company. But it's a very happy business to be in because we give our clients access to prospects that can help them grow their business and sustain business for years to come. So it's a very happy thing to do for people.
And I've always found when talking to fellow business developers that we always kind of figure out ways to help each other, maybe grow each other's businesses, share opportunities. Mm-hmm. I ask a kind of a master in BD, what do you think are the kind of skill sets or the learnings you've had through the years of what makes someone good at business development?
It's a great question. I love this question. I think it's DNA, first of all, especially on the door opening part of business development, which is a little bit of a different skill set and a different DNA from my experience than the people who are going on the meetings and closing the sales. So we hire senior level business developers who have done the entire job of business development before in their previous careers, from getting in the door through the first meeting, the proposals, following up, close, and all of that. But they are these rare business developers, and everybody knows what I'm talking about when I say this. They are these rare business developers that don't need to be at a networking event or a trade show or a conference in order to start a conversation with someone new. So what is it that does that? What is that DNA? It's, first of all, a natural curiosity about other people. I think it's people who can live in the moment, because when you're trying to get a meeting with someone and you contact them, they answer the phone and didn't expect your call, you can't do that phone call again 2 days later. You have one shot at this. So they have to be completely present and in the moment, and not everybody can do that. You have to be 100% focused on the other person. So I would say curiosity and being present would be two of the pieces which I believe are DNA. Some of it could be training, but most of it is DNA. So when we go out there and we hire, we are hiring for that DNA plus the experience. Because actually you said the phrase figure it out. That is our number one core value, is figure it out. Because every one of our clients comes to us with a puzzle they haven't yet solved. And our door openers need to be able to figure out what are the right things to do so they avoid doing the wrong things for our clients and their prospects. So what's really fascinating to me we've hired a lot of door openers over the years, is that as we interview them, even though they've come from different backgrounds, they've arrived at the very same conclusions about what works in business development because they stopped doing what didn't work and they kept doing what did work.
Great answers. And when you talk about DNA, and I don't know if optimism is a core DNA element, but let's just say it is. Do you think that clients, do they thrive off of optimism or maybe something like realism? And or how do you guys think about balancing those two things in the work you're doing?
Do you mean the clients or our door openers?
Your door openers, right, are tasked with essentially performing growth or business development for your clients, right?
Yes.
You want, I believe, my view on it is you want to go in with more optimism. That's what they want, but at the same time, you have to be a realist, right? You can't be, unrealistic with how you're approaching things. So how does your team think about being a team, an add-on that's optimistic versus maybe a little bit more realistic?
I'm not sure that they think about it either way. I mean, it's really just, what is it that the prospects need to hear in order to understand that meeting with our client is going to be the best decision they make all week? So if they don't get the meeting on the first try, which is really rare, right, then they're going to call back a couple days later with a slightly different message, a slightly different approach, or maybe more information. So if the prospect hasn't said yes yet, and it is the exact right prospect because we don't contact any of the wrong prospects for our clients, then it's just a matter of the prospect understanding why this meeting is so important. And there's a lot of different ways to get at that. So if one approach hasn't worked yet, the next approach may work, or the approach next week or the week after that. Is it a case study that we need to discuss? Is it a question that we need to pose? What is it that will help the prospect understand why he or she needs to say yes? So I wouldn't really say it's an optimism or a realism. It's just what approach is going to work to help the prospect understand why he should say yes.
Got it. And from a preparation standpoint, right, going into these calls, what are some of the pointers that you, as the leader of your business, instruct the door openers and or the clients to kind of give themselves the best chance on that first call, and when the door has been open, to advance the opportunity and have, optimize the chance for success, so to say?
So you mean on the first meeting then? What are we doing? So after the first meeting is booked and before it occurs, we do what we call a mini refresher with our clients. And that is, what is the structure of that meeting? What does that conversation need to look like so that our client can get to the best possible result? We talk about high gain questions, like not just any questions, but what are the high gain questions that will help our clients understand the gap between what the prospects have versus what the prospects would really love to have. Sometimes it's about pain, but it's not always about pain. Sometimes it's about the opportunity to have something better than what they have right now. So the kinds of questions that they ask will elicit the information they need so that when it's our client's turn to talk, they're following a path of dialogue that will help the prospect understand why they need to take next steps with whatever it is my clients sell. So there's the high gain questions, there's path of dialogue, there's being ready for the answers for the objections, because sometimes people will go into a meeting and they don't even think about the objections. So we help them to think that through and what those right answers will be. And then to set next steps with a date and time for the next step before the next meeting. 100% of our first meetings go to second meetings because of that, and because our door opener is there in case our client does not ask for the next meeting. The door opener will jump in there and get it. The other thing we do is we help our client understand how to manage time during that meeting. If it's a half an hour meeting, by minute number 23, our client's going to want to start closing up for next steps to get a date and time. If they don't do that, they may end up being at the 30-minute mark with no date and time for the next step. So if our client doesn't do that, our door opener will say, I'm watching the clock for us. I notice we have just a couple minutes left. We're going to need more time. Let's go ahead and book a second meeting. And then we'll make sure that that meeting happens. So we're instructing them on what the best practices are. Sometimes our clients are very senior level sellers, but it's a really good reminder so that they are getting the most out of these meetings. And especially now that the meetings are typically virtual, the prospects are requesting virtual meetings, and not every great seller has successfully switched to virtual selling yet and needs some reminders on how virtual selling works.
Yeah. I actually wrote a blog post recently about reading the room on a Zoom.
Oh, that's great. Forward that to me. I'd like to.
I will.
Yeah.
And like, oh, use the word like objections, right? Do you feel that it's normal practice almost in every sale for who you're selling to have some form of objection? Is it rare to do a sale where there's no objections?
Well, everybody's going to have an objection, but it's a matter of where in the communication process you handle it. You can handle it after it's voiced, if it's voiced. Sometimes it's not voiced. Or you can take it from the part where it was voiced and then remove the objection. We call it the objection makeover, where we're taking whatever those objections are and figuring out, can we resolve the objections and eliminate them by changing the target or being more narrow in focus for the target group, or changing the message and hitting that objection right head on so that there is no objection in the middle of the conversation. And when prospects enter a conversation, whether they're accepting a meeting or they're in that first meeting, they're going to come to it already along the path. And so where can you meet them on that path so that you get to the outcome that you want? That would be my perspective. I'm curious about your perspective.
I mean, I think you have to be persistent. Like, this type of stuff that I like to work on, I generally have conviction around. I believe in it, right? That's where I start. So when I try to figure out, let's use your expression, doors to open and conversations to have and opportunities to pursue, I like to take it that the goal is that I'm educating the person on the other side with my client that there is a need, a potential need for that solution in their business. And so my starting place is a place of, I believe, mental strength, that this is a good thing, this is a value add. I listen, like you're saying, I have to be present, I have to listen to what the reaction is. But sometimes the objections are, something I would have never thought of, and something that's specific to their organization, or maybe something that we missed, which happens all the time. And other times I just think they're being a little bit short-sighted or, weak-minded, so to say, and they're not really willing to listen to what we're saying. And that's where a little bit of, appropriate forcefulness comes in.
Yeah, I find in those situations, the questions are awesome. And when people think about answers for objections, they think about statements typically and not necessarily questions. But I find the questions will open someone up who may be a little closed to listening. You ask them a question and it kind of shakes them into the moment with you. And then you're down a different path of dialogue. There's sometimes people say to me, but I don't like what the prospects say in answer to the question. And I'll say to them, ask a different question. Because if you ask a different question, you're on a different path of dialogue.
Well said. Well said. And now that you've been doing this formally for 25 years, I'm sure there's a story of business development before you started Kopp Consulting. You've seen obviously different business environments, different business cycles. Anyone reading the paper, there's a lot of suggestions that we're in a recession, entering a recession. Two questions. One is, how do you feel the sales process typically functions in a weak or declining economy? And two is, how do you really handle, what objections would someone expect to face, and how can you kind of go against those objections?
So what happens when the economy is difficult? Like this is fascinating, and I've come out with some articles about this recently. But what happens from a sales perspective is that people have to get more creative, more focused, more specific on markets which may be spending closer and being closer to the time that prospects are willing to spend. So you may not be going as wide, you may be going more narrow and deep. But people don't tend to spend time looking for the markets that are spending. If they spent more time on strategy to identify that before they go into execution, they would be more successful. But because they're worried and they're scared, they will start pursuing anything and often take deals for their companies which aren't the right deals, that are lower in margin or may not see to the end of the project because as I said, they were never really the right deals to begin with, but they're so worried about getting any deals that they're just out there throwing a lot of spaghetti against the wall. So I recommend people take a really deep breath, rethink what the strategy is. Often, even in times of challenging and uncertain economic times, there are groups of prospects that are facing what we would call trigger events that would cause them to be in the market sooner than they would otherwise if they weren't facing these events. So if you can identify groups of prospects like that, and with sales messaging that helps them understand why they need to have a meeting and to take action, then that is one of the best ways that I can recommend people can still sell and be successful in a challenging environment. But people have to take a deep breath first and realize that people still spend. Not everybody, but certain people still spend in these kinds of situations.
Got it. And on like the relationship front, right? You have people on your team that open the doors. I assume that many of them have experience and deep, long-standing relationships. When a door opener is on the phone with a client pitching somebody, what's the expectation for that client to kind of transition the relationship from the door opener's realm to their own? And what are best practices when there's someone ushering you into an opportunity and then it becomes your own, and being respectful of the person that brought you in and trying to represent them properly, but at the same time putting your own spin and twist on it?
Yeah, I get it. So when we're introducing our clients to a prospect, it's not typically somebody who we know. What happens typically is that for our client, we will put together a group of prospects who they don't know, or who our door opener may or may not know, but who are exactly right for our client. They need to meet our client for a particular reason. So our door opener is representing our client as if he or she was a member of the client's company, but not saying to their friend, I want you to meet so-and-so. It's really reaching out to somebody they don't know and telling them why the meeting is so important to them. Once that prospect says yes to the meeting, the door opener is on the meeting with our client, because most of these meetings are happening virtually these days. The prospects want it that way. So our door opener will open up the meeting, introduce our client to the prospect. And remember, our door opener is representing our client as if he or she was a member of the client's team. So in the mind of the prospect, they're there to meet the subject matter expert, who is our client. So we'll make the introduction, and then the door opener will remind the prospect why he or she said yes to the meeting. And that gets them into what we would call the conversation funnel, and then turns the meeting over to our client. Our client does what he or she does best, and then at the end of it, as we said before, closes up for next steps and gets a date and time. But as I said, if our client doesn't do that, the door opener will jump in there and get the time for the next meeting.
Got it. And then from what you've seen over the last few years, the beginning of COVID and the rise of use of using tools like Zoom to conduct a meeting, do you feel like it's best practice to put a presentation on a Zoom, or is it better to have just face-to-face, so to say, or digital face-to-face, and leave the presentation as part of a follow-on?
I feel like that's really a trick question, isn't it? Right?
No, no.
Yes, definitely a needs discussion, like a discussion about what is the prospect facing currently? What does nirvana look like for the prospect? And identifying that gap. And that really happens through conversations and questions. Our client can have something to show ready in case the conversation goes there, and the visual aid will actually aid the conversation visually. But we do have clients who start out wanting very desperately to show a PowerPoint. In fact, we had one client who would bring 4 or 5 different team members to a 30-minute call and have a 29-page PowerPoint. And that's where we started saying, okay, let's level set. After the first meeting is booked and before it occurs, let's talk about the best practices. Because if you add up all the time for the introductions, you would never even have a meeting. And that's loading the call anyway, so you don't want to do that. So face-to-face is better. Have something visual ready and make sure that it will aid the conversation, or just don't show it. You can always show it in your next meeting. It's actually a perfect reason for the next meeting is to show something visually that will help the prospect understand why whatever it is our client is selling is going to be very helpful for them.
Right. And in terms of expectations, I think you just were saying, using that word, and level setting, what have you kind of found as a best practice for setting the right KPI or metric in the role that you play? Because this is something we all kind of think through and struggle with to a degree.
Yeah.
But how do you think about setting expectations with your clients?
Yeah, so it's really interesting because I was just talking to somebody yesterday, actually, who is looking at us and 2 other companies that say they do what we do. And they sell based on dials. And I'm like, really? They sell based on dials? Why is a dial meaningful? So yes, you want to look at number of calls, number of emails, number of LinkedIn, number of text messages, but the sheer number is unimportant. It's actually an inverse relationship, because if you have a ton of calls, like let's say you have 60 calls in an hour, well, you have 60 crappy calls. What's that going to do to start a relationship? I'm more interested in the quality of the interaction and the messaging and what happens as a result of that interaction. We have stats, for example, depending on where you are in your outreach. Is it the first outreach, third outreach, fifth reach out? But a good benchmark for calls or touch points is 6 to 10 touch points in an hour. You can have 6 to 10 good touch points. And by that, I mean, you have looked at where you left off last time. You look at your prospect. You've done the research on the prospect and recorded it. You've decided on the strategy for the communication for where you are in the relationship with the prospect. You open that communication, either phone, or if you leave a voicemail, then you're going to write a thoughtful email, not a crappy one and not a really long one, right? And then you're going to record that in the CRM. So we actually did a study a couple of years ago of how long each kind of touch point takes, so that we can come up with this benchmark of 6 to 10 and justify that. Because if you're going faster than that, you're likely not putting a lot of thought into each individual touch point. So the touch points are important. Beyond that, we look at warm leads, but we define warm leads. A warm lead is not somebody who asks for information. A warm lead is where you've had either an email back and forth or a conversation where someone has expressed interest, but there isn't a meeting yet. Having that definition is really important, because if we have 20 door openers and each one of them defines warm leads differently, we have reports that are for crap. So we need good reports. We also measure conversations with decision makers versus conversations with assistants, because those function differently as leading indicators. We are also looking at the percent of first meetings that go to second meetings, because they all should go to second meetings if you've done a good job with the target, our client has done a good job establishing value during the meeting, and that there was a request for the next meeting. Those 3 things have to work together. in order to get first meetings, which go to second meetings. We also measure revenue generating activities versus non-revenue generating activities. If our clients are asking for lots of reports that take time away from outreach, they're going to get less outreach and fewer meetings. So when we look at that, if we need to make a difference with the client, we will sit the client down and say, when you ask us for these specific reports, you're taking time away from outreach. That happens all the time in sales teams. The manager asks the person who's responsible for revenue generating activities to spend 3 hours generating a report. Why? Can't somebody else do that? Like, let's keep the people
Right.
who have the talent focused on the outreach. So those are a couple of the metrics that we report on for our clients.
No, that's great stuff. And I do think maybe the slight different, there are differences between what you do and I do, even though it's in the same realm, is working with a lot of startups over the last few years. The pressure from the investor community may have been a little bit less so 2 years ago and 3 years ago, because it was more growth focused. Now it's more, as we know, revenue and profitability oriented. And when you do business development and that's kind of the landscape, obviously setting the right expectations going into it's important. But I would say I'm not a magician, right? A sales cycle for your business may be 12 months or 18 months.
Right.
By working with us, I can't make it 2 or 3 months. But the pipe, that's why I'm just going to turn it to the pipeline, right? The importance of having a diverse pipeline, depth of pipeline. So as a fellow business developer, how do you think about a pipeline and the importance of a pipeline in the work that you guys are doing?
I'm really glad that you brought that up. And it is hard to have a client understand that and appreciate the pipeline when all they want are meetings and closed sales. And so we had a client a couple of years ago who had an 18-month sales cycle. At the end of 6 months, took a look at the meetings we had. We had lots of meetings, but they didn't have any closed sales. So their CFO came in and said, listen, this can't be working if we don't have any closed sales. And I said to them, how long is your sales cycle? Because I already knew, I asked them before we even engaged. And they said it's 18 months. And I was like, okay, well, we're 6 months into this and you didn't meet everybody on day one. What makes you or your CFO think that you should have a closed sale by now? And it's really hard for people to wait. But if you ask them how long the sales cycle takes, they'll tell you. I met somebody in year 1 and they closed in year 3 and it was the biggest account ever. But somehow when they're outsourcing it, it's hard to apply those same metrics and realize that shouldn't be the case. We worked with an accounting firm who did something very similar. You think the accounting firm, they know their metrics, but they're like, where are our closed sales? And I'm like, we've only been engaged for like 9 months. You haven't gotten to your 18 months yet.
I think the best kind of feeling to get or something that's come up multiple times is you're working with someone, they're paying you, they expect you to do certain things. Maybe you don't get the revenue and they say, listen, I'm not getting a return on investment. Let's part ways, right? We've both dealt with that on many occasions. I think it's interesting when you have clients that obviously you try to maintain ongoing relationships with personally or professionally, when they come back to you and they kind of took for granted the value of the pipeline and being in front of all these decision makers and types of companies they want to be doing business with. So that for me has been just a great turnaround story when I feel like they've lost hope and I was a little bit frustrated, and then they circle back and want to kind of figure out a way to do something thereafter.
Yeah. Well, the other part of that too is the timely and effective follow through, because you can get them the meeting and the meeting can go great and it results in a second meeting. But if they don't have timely and effective follow through so that they deepen the relationship with the prospect and the prospect spends with them when the prospect is ready to spend, it's really hard to turn that around. So one of the things that we added to our service, I don't know, a couple years ago, is we monitor what happens after the initial meeting. And if the seller is not performing the way they should with timely and effective follow through, we'll offer to help them take that off their plate and make sure that we're ushering that opportunity forward. Or we'll blow the whistle with the sales leadership and let them know that, listen, you're spending a lot of money to fill the top of the funnel here, and your people are not necessarily taking these meetings seriously and doing the relationship building that they should do, so that when it's time for the prospect to spend, you're going to be the choice, and they need to take it more seriously. But that's incredibly frustrating. I'm sure you've had that too. I mean, it's so frustrating. So that's why we say, like, if we'll get in there and we'll do the follow-up for you, but don't not do the follow-up.
I'm with you. And
Yeah.
and obviously I can't follow up with every opportunity that we're pursuing,
Right.
over time. And so I'm willing to do a lot of it. And I appreciate a good follow-up. And I never told you the story, but when I was in real estate, we were spending money probably a decade ago on Google Ads. And I was the one that pushed to do that. I felt like it was low-hanging fruit, it was cost effective, and we were getting lead after lead. And what did the internal sales team or leasing team say? How are we doing? Did we close deals? They said they're not good leads. And I was like, that's bullshit. They can't all be bad leads, right? It's just not possible. We're showing our property, we're marketing the right audience. They can't all be bad. And I zeroed in that it was all about the follow-up and the follow-through, which was lacking there. And so when you started, I took it upon myself, as I'm going to land the plane here, is to do the follow-up on behalf of the company, because I knew at least I was in control of that mini process to give us the best chance, if we were spending money, to hopefully see a deal through. Sadly, I didn't have all the great tips you gave about being strategic and knowing your customer and all that, but it was, and many organizations are dealing with this because people are busy.
True. Yeah, it's true. And it goes to compensation too with the sales team, because if the sales team is compensated heavily on the close, they don't care so much about top of funnel opportunities. They only want the middle to the bottom of funnel opportunities. But what that does is it leaves you with an empty top of funnel if nobody is nurturing these relationships that we bring in. One of the other things that we did, because that drove me crazy, where if we would make a great meeting, but it didn't close because someone would follow up, then someone would say the meeting wasn't good. So now what we do is within 24 hours of the time the meeting occurs, we want notification that, yes, it was the right level decision maker from an approved prospect list who showed up interested in learning more. And because our door opener is on the meeting too, we have a perspective. So at the end of that call, there's typically a debrief. The client, seller, and our door opener agree, yes, it was the right meeting, it met all the qualifications, and we only bill the meeting fee piece. We do an hourly and a meeting fee, but we only bill the meeting fee piece after the meeting occurs, as long as it's with the agreed upon decision maker from an approved company who is interested in learning more. So then if somebody later says these weren't good meetings, it's like, wait a minute, you said they were good meetings. They wouldn't be on this invoice if you didn't say they were good meetings. So we have to start with that they were good meetings. Now let's talk about what happened after the meeting. So that part of it was helpful because we're getting that feedback within 24 hours after the meeting occurs.
Right. So feedback loop and following up are obviously key to success in the Bizydev / sales process. All right, we're going to wrap up here in a few, but a lot of people that I think listen to these interviews are kind of rising stars in the business. Mm-hmm. And so with all of your expertise, and I will say that you probably are a great relationship builder, what is a kind of a talking point to someone that's starting their career out, that's trying to network and build relationships? What do you think where should their head be at to do a good job on that front?
So if you're doing that based on relationships, and there's only so much time in a day, you want to pick out maybe the top 20 people and put them in priority order, who, if you knew them and had a relationship with them, it would change your life. So who are those people? Where are you going to meet them? Like, you may need to meet them with direct outreach. Isn't that funny? Because you may not know anybody who knows these people. and then make sure that you're offering them something first. If you're going to ask them, who do you want to meet? And see if you can introduce them to somebody who would change their world. And so that's what I would do. I would focus on who are the top 20. If it's business relationships, look at the people who serve the same kinds of clients that you serve, or perhaps the same clients you want to serve, but don't currently, and strike up a relationship with them. And then talk about, listen, as your business grows, you're going to have a need to refer people like them business. And you want to get to know them and how they serve their clients. So when the time comes, you'll feel comfortable making the introduction to them. That usually brings those people to the table pretty quickly. And then you can have a conversation about that. They will often turn the tables back to you and ask you the same question. But it can't be just once. That's the key. Like, people will meet with somebody just once, but that's not enough. That's the beginning. Then you need a follow-up and a follow-up and a follow-up, and maintain continuity with any one person so that you do have a relationship with them over time. There is trust between the two of you. And then they will introduce you to other people who you need to know as well.
Yeah. And I think ultimately it comes down to being more of someone that's open to giving versus taking, right? And that is when you say about DNA, and you either have that or you don't, and you could develop and do a better job always. But I think that's a good mindset when you're in your 20s or 30s and you're trying to build a career, maybe in business development, relationship building, is be known for someone that helped other people, and it kind of will, the rest will fall into place. So well, Caryn, thank you. So first of all, thanks for taking the time. Where are you calling in from today?
Today I'm in Lauderdale by the Sea, Florida, where we spend Beautiful. 8 months a year, and the other 4 are in New Jersey, but New Jersey's cold, so I'm in Florida.
Okay, perfect. So Caryn Kopp, Chief Door Opener from Kopp Consulting. Appreciate you coming out today, and looking forward to continuing our friendship and relationship through the years. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.